This is Lakewood Ranch, a master planned community outside of Bradenton in Sarasota. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but the roads are plentiful, congestion is to a minimum. However, not everything in Florida is a master planned community. There are some master planned disasters in the state. This is what most suburban areas in the United States look like. This one is Houston, Texas. Here's Sacramento, California. This is Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. Notice the interstate planked by commercial districts. You can see a beltway that wraps the city, golf courses. There's also mountainous terrain to deal with here. You can see at least 5 major roads that all intersect in the downtown district. This is a well-planned urban area. You have commercial, residential, suburban, farmland, a very good urban development plan considering the topography of the area being mountainous. Dothan, Alabama, even from satellite imagery, you can see the urban development plan. Lexington, Kentucky, you can see several layers of beltways wrapping perfectly around the urban core, instantly transforming into farmland once you leave the urban core. Denver, Colorado, you have mountains, you have lakes, and you have infrastructure for a very large city. Despite that, you can see from satellite imagery that it's a well-organized urban area. Then there's Tampa, Florida, an absolute urban development nightmare. From phosphate mining right next door to luxury houses, expressway next to apartment complexes, commercial districts that just seem to pop up out of nowhere, and of course the sprawling suburbs that meet the phosphate mining industry. Where do you even start to begin describing the urban development nightmare that has become most of Florida's outskirts? The state of Florida really has done some of the worst urban planning of anywhere in the United States. Despite the fact the state has been growing steadily, and recently the state has been doing some infrastructure improvements to catch up with the growth that it's had, the state hasn't done a very good job of urban planning. And this has led to some of the worst bottlenecks that exist in the United States, even in areas that do not have large populations. See, there's areas like Los Angeles, New York, which have millions upon millions of people living there, and it's understandable that there's going to be traffic congestion, but you really got to scratch your head at some of these traffic jams in Florida, knowing very well that there's no excuse for it. One of the biggest nightmares in Florida is the I-4 corridor near Orlando. This area is always bumper to bumper. The state of Florida proclaims that it can't build infrastructure in this area because there are protected wildlife areas. Despite the fact the state of Florida does very little to help alleviate the traffic of the millions of daily commuters in the state, they are willing to turn some of these protected wildlife areas into golf courses for the wealthy. In fact, the state of Florida has been battling this issue with its residents for a few years now, where they want to turn protected wildlife areas into golf courses for the wealthy. However, despite the fact the state is willing to transform these wildlife areas into golf courses for the rich people, they refuse to create any infrastructure in these wildlife areas to help alleviate the congestion and traffic that the people of Florida deal with on a daily basis. So let's be clear that the excuse that the state of Florida has for not creating more infrastructure is that it would get in the way of vulnerable wildlife areas, areas that have to be protected. But while the state won't do anything to alleviate traffic congestion on the excuse of protecting wildlife areas, they have no problem trying to turn these wildlife areas into golf courses and hotels. One such example is the Crew Swamp between Fort Myers and Naples. This protected area is right in the heart of an urban core, and people that live and work in this area have to take an hour and 15-minute detour around this wildlife area. Yet despite the fact the state of Florida claims that they can't create any roadways through the Crew Swamp to alleviate Southwest Florida's traffic, not even options like an elevated highway, the state has recently allowed the surrounding area, which used to be agriculture, to be rezoned into residential areas. And in the future, tens of thousands of new houses are going to be built in what used to be orange fields surrounding this area. So once again, we see how the state of Florida proclaims that these environmentally protected areas can't be touched when infrastructure is needed, but when builders and developers or rich people have any interest involved, they have no problem redeveloping areas that are sensitive. The issue with creating thousands of houses here in the Alico area between Naples and Fort Myers is that this is prime Florida panther habitat. The agricultural utilization of this land didn't impact the protected Florida panthers. But once again, when developers want to rezone agricultural land and make more houses, the state of Florida allows it. But when the people of Florida need infrastructure, then they can't go there. It's hard to believe that a state that allows phosphate stacking at the mouth of Tampa Bay has a problem with creating a roadway to alleviate traffic for hundreds of thousands of people because it's a wildlife sensitive area. The reality of Florida is that the people of Florida can't get the infrastructure they need for various excuses, but developers and mining companies can do all types of reckless behavior, destroying the state of Florida. Take a look at Polk County, Florida, one of the worst ecological disasters that exists in the United States. This map shows you the holdings by mining companies in Florida. You can see that the area that they've destroyed already is about the size of the city of Tampa, a bit larger, and the area that they're planning to destroy is about the size of the Tampa metro area. Do you think the state of Florida cares about the ecological damage of phosphate mining? Florida's governor recently signed a bill that allows the radioactive waste from phosphate mining to be used in asphalt for our roads in Florida, claiming that this material is harmless and the most affordable way to repave the roads in Florida. And to be fair, we have seen a lot of new asphalt in this particular region of the state because of the new bill. So the state of Florida is now supplementing the removal of radioactive waste from the mining industries by putting it on Florida roadways. But phosphate mining for what? Who buys this stuff? Allegedly, it's for fertilizer. Many people in Florida use fertilizer on their golf courses. This golf course in Naples has an entire outdoor building just to store fertilizers. Now, I used to live near this golf course, and in the past in this area, they used to bring the fertilizer in by the dump truck load simply to keep the greens green. Require that much chemicals. Look at that. You need an entire freaking building just to store the chemicals that they use on these golf courses. But at least it stays here because it turns out that on a global level, fertilizer is used by countries to enrich uranium, and it's believed that much of the phosphate mining in Florida is shipped to other parts of the world with the pretext that it's being used for fertilizer. Now, I don't know about you guys, but does the notion of taking fertilizer from Florida halfway around the world for fertilizer seem to make any economical sense? It's possible that the companies that are buying this fertilizer are really using it to enrich uranium. Talking about golf courses, knowing the connection between all these things, you could probably assume that the governor of Florida probably plays golf with the people at Mosaic when they decided to dump all of their freaking radioactive waste on our roads in Florida. Once again, it just gives you an idea of how corrupt the state of Florida is. And sadly, part of the infrastructure nightmare in Florida is that the local government agencies are more concerned about how they can enrich themselves. Even if it means helping somebody else enrich uranium, the only thing that's not being enriched is the landscape of Florida. It's being destroyed. When states like Alabama and Kentucky can figure out how to make a practical city landscape and not a urban development nightmare, but a state like Florida that's growing can't, to just give you an idea of some of the underlying issues that this state is facing. We see all this growth and development here in Florida, and many people assume that all this is being done accordingly, but what people don't realize is the real price tag that the state of Florida is having to pay to allow these developers to tear a heart into the landscape of Florida that can never be healed. Many people fail to realize that many of these sprawling suburbs in Florida don't even have access to city sewage. They're on septic tanks. Here in Lakewood Ranch, which is proclaimed to be the greatest, listen to this, a YouTuber recently made a video claiming that Lakewood Ranch, where I currently live, is the greatest master plan community on the face of the earth. Well, I recently took a walk around my neighborhood in Lakewood Ranch, and I noticed that commercial buildings like 7-Elevens and grocery stores don't have access to city sewage. They're on septic tanks. Let me say that again. Commercial buildings like grocery stores and 7-Elevens on major state highways don't have access to city sewage. They are on freaking septic tanks. If I recall, when I lived in Cuba, like in the mid 90s, they connected our house to city sewage in the 1990s in Cuba. Yet in 2025 in Florida, we have commercial buildings on septic tanks. Many of these fast-growing areas like Marion Oaks, Lehigh Acres, Northport, all these areas are building houses that have no city water, they're on well water, and no city sewage, they're on septic tanks. These are entire communities that are popping up in Florida that have literally zero infrastructure. If you live in a newer gated community, like a golf course community, for example, you'll have access to city water and city sewage, but that is because when they build these master plan communities, it's a developer who's putting in that infrastructure. Do you think the state of Florida is out there putting up infrastructure for people? It isn't. There's been a few exceptions, like the Rosemary neighborhood in Naples, Florida, but that came with an assessment to people's property taxes. So this is like an older street in Naples with some humble little houses, but it was close to downtown Naples, so eventually rich guys wanted to come in and build McMansions on that street, so they convinced the city to go in and put in infrastructure and get rid of the septic tanks so their new houses could have city drainage and water and all the utilities that you would expect them to have. But at the end of the day, that is a rare exception, and once again, the reason they did it wasn't to provide services to people, it was because some rich guy wanted to build a McMansion in the way. But at the end of the day, the problem comes down to the fact that most of these city councils and all these people that work for local governments are easily bought by builders and developers. They're easy to take bribes. There's so much corruption in Florida that it leads to these urban development nightmares. In most cases, they make a plan, they make a growth development plan, but in the case of Florida, corruption is so rampant that they can't push out a practical growth development plan because at every corner somebody's being bribed into doing something that shouldn't be done. And that corruption is what's led to the urban nightmare of Florida, where nothing makes sense. When you look at what's going on in some of these suburbs in Tampa, for example, highways in all directions, different type of zoning all up against each other, it's an absolute nightmare. And it makes life impossible and impractical for the people in these communities. And the sad part is that, we see these board meetings on TV, on YouTube these days. You can see how blatantly these individuals are embedded and entrenched with carrying out the will of the developers, when in fact they don't set their foot down. They don't set their foot down and say, okay, this is the way urban development needs to take place. These are these roads where they need to be. And unfortunately, in the case of Florida, it's this corruption and inept behavior from local government agencies that has prevented these cities from growing properly. It's this complete free-for-all of development, reckless building, no planning, no accountability, and probably a crapload of bribery that's led to the current situation we're in Florida, where developers are able to enrich themselves by buying off government officials, ensuring that they can build whatever the crap they want, however they want, with absolutely nobody to say that's a red flag. You can't do that. There's no logic or rhyme to Florida's urban development. Simply, developers rezone agricultural land and start building houses, high-rise apartments, and you end up with this situation right here. It is 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's the off-season, and you can see the traffic nightmare that these people have to deal with, living in an area that has absolutely no infrastructure, but continues to grow endlessly. Despite the fact they're building lots more housing, there's no plans to expand these roadways to be able to accommodate the amount of traffic that all this new construction is bringing to the area. Eventually, these areas become food deserts, a topic for one of our oncoming videos. What is of these communities that are left behind on the other side of the traffic gridlock? The communities that are nothing but residential, endless suburbs with not enough infrastructure and no actual real restaurants, places to shop, nothing. These are bedroom communities behind a gridlock of traffic. What is life like for the people that live in these places? We'll explore that topic on a coming video. So make sure you subscribe to Southern Life, where we bring you the most accurate news about Florida. A lot of these YouTubers that are creating videos about Florida are nothing more than clickbaiters. They make predictions that never ever happen. Every week they proclaim that Florida's real estate is in a crash when it doesn't take place. These are the types of clickbait videos that some of you guys like to watch. Unfortunately, a lot of the information that those guys are giving you is a pile of garbage. And while it's interesting to click and watch their videos and hear their things that they're saying about what's dooming and impending in Florida, at the end of the day, these guys are insulting revenue, and their videos are nothing more than clickbait. So if you want real information from what's happening in Florida, keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion. Check it out.